Back. I thank you for your testimony. We'll now move to the question and answer portion of the hearing, and I will begin questioning by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. All right, let's talk about these kids. Your duty ends once they're properly placed. Question number one, it's my understanding that you all do not notify the local Department of Social Services or other local child welfare agency in the community in which a child is being placed. Is that correct, yes or no?
Mr. Chairman, we have to protect the privacy of children, as you would expect for any child, and so we try not to provide information about the child.
So you don't provide that information to local child welfare agencies that the child's been placed there, or the school system, isn't that correct?
We work with the local agencies once a child has been placed, if there's a need to support them with regard to, for example, school or other social services. So we will work with local agencies where necessary.
When a familial relationship is claimed, do you all do any kind of a DNA test to establish a genetic link between the sponsor and the child? And I asked that question, and it became more poignant last night as I was watching Sound of Freedom, because the bad guy was bringing a child who'd been kidnapped across the border. The good guys were there to intercept, but he presented fake documents claiming to be the uncle of the child. So do you all do a DNA test? Because I just got to tell you, Mr. Secretary, my information indicates that you all only do a DNA test in about 23% of the cases, and that's usually looking for child predators of some sort, not familial relationship. Is that true?
Mr. Chairman, we go through a thorough vetting process for each and every sponsor. We make every effort to try to find the closest relative for that child. And one of the tools that we use is DNA testing, voluntary DNA testing.
But you don't do that in every case where familial relationship is claimed. Isn't that true?
Well, we make sure we verify the identity of the person. So, for example, we will use birth certificates. We will use other documentation that proves who the individual is.
But a birth certificate coming from another country, just like the passports presented in the film last night, may be forged. You would agree that documents can be forged, and that's not necessarily reliable. Man, I just got to tell you, I'm a member of Ancestry.com, and I have their DNA test. They can tell me about fourth cousins that I never knew existed on my father's side. There's a way to do this, and if we're truly going to properly vet before we place these children, we need to be doing more DNA testing. Let me move on.
And that's why we use DNA testing where it can help.
Well, occasionally. I'd like to go over the sponsor vetting process in more detail. I checked this morning, and field guidances 10 and 11 are still in effect. OR continues to waive background checks for people claiming to be distant family members and for other adults who live in the house where the child is being placed. With that as a background, I would have to ask that OR only completed fingerprint checks in 23% of cases. What percentage of sponsors now have completed fingerprint checks before you place a child with them?
And Mr. Chairman, we place the care and well-being of every unaccompanied child as our highest priority. And that's why I need to clarify what you and others have said, because you've misunderstood Field Guidance 10 and 11. You applied it to every child, and it does not apply to every child, those two guidances. Field Guidance 10 applies to only to children who are either eligible to be assigned to a parent, a legal guardian, or
or somebody who purports to be a close family relative. We've already been there. Right. Okay, let me ask you this.
And that we have to document and prove before we release that child.
You have documents, but they might be forged. All right.
We do everything to make sure that no one gets through the process by providing fraud. In fact, I just had a conversation with case managers about a very case where someone tried to present fraudulent information.
And I appreciate that. Look, let me make this clear to everybody. I know you got a tough job, and I want to work with you to try to solve some of these problems.
Appreciate your saying that.
But I am concerned when I see statements like what appeared in the New York Times article, which I've asked to be incorporated into the record, where according to the recording, it says, you said, if Henry Ford had seen this in his plants, he would have never become famous and rich. This is not the way you do an assembly line. You want to explain that? I'm going to give you a chance to explain that, because that's a damning statement. And on top of the Florida report, which says that, which I agree with, that if we were treating U.S. children this way, it'd be considered neglect and somebody'd be going to jail. Please explain.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me a chance to explain, because there is a very simple explanation for that. As you said yourself, and as I think every member has said, we were facing deep challenges trying to make sure that children were not stuck in the Department of Homeland Security's adult detention facilities. That is not a place for children. So we needed to make sure we had a safe place for them to be. good bed, the care they needed. So we need to be very efficient with the work we were doing to always have a bed available. So what I said is, we need to make sure we're working efficiently. It's about process, not people. Henry Ford would not have become famous simply because he produced a lot of vehicles. He became famous because he produced good quality vehicles at a time when it was tough to do so. We want to do quality work. You can't do that if one day you do well and the next day you don't. My comment dealt with the process, not the people.
Well, and I will close by just saying that I still think there's a lot to be done. I'm glad to hear you say those things, but there's a lot to be done because I think we're letting too many children, and even one is not acceptable, but we're having hundreds or thousands of children who are slipping through the cracks, and a better job needs to be done. And I think using more DNA testing and more real background checks instead of just a background check that is some internet search engine would be helpful.
Look forward
I
to
yield
working.
back and now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Castor, for 5 minutes.